Now, everything work.
We're live.
Fantastic. We're live and it's on the dot of 5:30. Hi, my name's Lara Torr and I'm an audio describer from Adelaide. And with me...
Hello, I'm McRostie. I am an audio describer who's also from Adelaide, but now lives in sunny Melbourne, Victoria.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about audio description, what it is, how it developed, how we both use it, but we are also going to attempt to describe some images which have been submitted by, actually we don't know who has submitted them. They have appeared in a magical folder and we're going to have a crack at describing user submitted images. So audio description is the process of using spoken language, which always is prepared first as written language, to explain visual content to people who are blind or vision impaired. It's something I've been doing for about 5 years, and it's primarily known in Australia as a tool that's available in the theatre sector, but it has applications throughout the arts, and really it can be used for anything visual. So we mainly work, both Will and I, as describers for the arts, but describers in other countries also work on sporting events. I've heard of describers who've travelled on cruise ships to tell people who are blind about different iconic sites along the way. Will, you've done some unusual jobs, I think.
Yeah, I've done some fireworks. I've done a lot of little exhibitions. I did a whole exhibition for the Museum of Australian Democracy at Eureka describing the Eureka flag and both the design of the flag and how it has been slowly destroyed a little bit over the years, which is a really interesting example of, you know, what the image is and what the actual physical object and medium is, and where the two might diverge. I might just jump in, Lara, quickly and just acknowledge the first Australians as the traditional custodians of the continent on which we are speaking and talking and meeting, whose cultures are among the oldest living cultures in human history, and that we pay our respect to the elders of that community, and we want to extend our recognition to their descendants who might be present in this discussion.
Yeah, and it's kind of amazing to do that digitally and cross-nationally, given that, well, both of us are currently located in different cities and this session is going out, you know, far and wide. So I also pay my respects to elders across the country. I guess one of the things that often comes up quickly in a conversation about audio description, because it has the word audio in its title, it's easy to assume that it's for people who are unable to hear. But neither of us are fluent in sign language, and this is not for people who are deaf. It's for people who are blind or vision impaired. So typically someone who experiences audio description, especially at the theatre, does that via a special headset. So the describer would normally be located somewhere physically separate from their audience, usually in one of the tech boxes, using a microphone to read a pre-prepared script which goes into great detail before the show about things like set characters and costumes, and then in between dialogue offers really pithy bits of information that restrict themselves, or certainly are intended to be restricted, to descriptions of visual content. It's not about leading interpretations of plot, sharing your own opinions, or kind of inserting yourself into the performance. So the history of audio description, as you might imagine, is that it developed essentially through people having the experience of attending the theatre with a friend or family member who was blind or vision impaired and having to do this kind of surreptitious whisper during the show to explain what's going on, and she's just come back on in a new costume, or he's picked up the sword from the side table, all that kind of thing, which I can imagine would have been a really challenging experience, both for the blind person listening and for the person trying to, firstly, wing it on the spot as they're receiving the information themselves, turn it into some kind of eloquent narration, but also you'd be very conscious that the people around you could hear it and that would be altering their experience of the show. So my understanding is that description developed formally in the UK and the US at around the same time, and in both instances from people who kind of had this realization of there's a better way to do this than live and informally in the theatre. And at the time, with some fairly simple FM radio, you know, walkie-talkie type technology, you could polish up the whole process and share it with more than one person at a time. It's really grown around the world, but it's relatively new in Australia. And I think we're an unusual country, and we'll cut in if I'm jumping to this too early in my spiel. But we are unusual in that many other places on a similar kind of socioeconomic footing to Australia have audio description available on television. And we don't. There is currently a trial on the ABC's iView where people can access description for selected shows. It's also available on Netflix.
The iView stuff content all got taken down about 6 months ago, so there's currently no audio described content on iView, which is unfortunate.
Wow, I'm out of the loop. That's a real shame, because my feeling is that if you haven't experienced description before, it's a big ask for someone to leave a familiar place like home and venture to an art gallery or a museum or a theatre or a public event like, you know, the pageant or the Fringe Parade or a fireworks display in order to experience it. So at the moment, the audience for description is growing, and it's growing a little more slowly in Australia than I think it is in other countries in the world, where people's first connection to description potentially comes in a much more intimate and comfortable setting, which is at home watching something on the telly with your friends or your family. So yeah, that's kind of, I guess, some of the background of what it is and where it happens most frequently in Australia.
I'd say the other key aspect to kind of know in the history of audio description, especially in Australia, is that it has been in the past a volunteer-based service. So people have been doing this for a while in Australia, but with very little support and very little sense of that there might be a best practice around this and a way to do this well, and a way to do this in a manner that is consistent and consistently enjoyable for the broadest possible description audience. So a big part of what we're kind of working on in Australia still is demonstrating that this can be something that is really valuable, very consistent, and can be applied to almost any art form in a way that will be beneficial. Because I've heard stories of a lot of people who haven't experienced description, went along and had a really bad experience with it, and decided that it really wasn't for them. So if anyone is listening who is like that, please know that leaps and bounds are being made, and people are making an effort to try and develop this craft in Australia and make sure it is serving the communities that it needs to serve.
And look, the debate around volunteer versus professional practice is not necessarily as black and white as if you get paid, you're good, and if you don't get paid, you're not good. But description is all about preparation, and a huge number of hours go into on average for a theatre show, where we generally work in pairs, which I think is really important in description because we all have inbuilt visual biases. A blind person is listening to the description each per at least 15 hours work, and that's a huge ask for a volunteer. So we come from a particular political perspective in terms of professional. Australia was the first state in Australia to implement a professional service, and it's grown significantly since we companies for the description service, which I think is quite interesting. So we thought we'd just kind of give you a little bit of background about the service, but also really briefly how we both got into it. I've told this story before, but I first discovered description when I accidentally sat on the remote while watching a DVD of a BBC adaptation of Charles Dickens' Bleak House, which is excellent and I recommend watching it. But I turned on the description by sitting on the remote, and suddenly this disembodied voice kind of was added into a scene where nobody was talking, but I could hear a voice explaining that somebody was across a garden, and that piqued my interest. I found out what it was. I also worked out how to turn it off, because as a sighted person, it did seem kind of redundant to have somebody describing things that I was able to see. I drew my attention to the fact that audio description existed, and then a couple of years later, when a fantastic describer from the UK called Willie Elliott visited Adelaide to run a training course, and it's kind of burgeoned and occasionally become a dominant life experience since that time. So I thought that I would run through some of the kind of top 5 principles of audio description, and I'm going to attempt to on my screen, and Will might tell me if it's working.
Oh,
Thank
me.
you to anyone who's waiting while you get a brief glimpse at my desktop. And if there are any blind or vision impaired people watching or listening, then apologies for these moments when I do the thing that describers should never do and assume that we're all able to see. So the first thing I'm going to put on the screen is the top 5 rules of audio description as determined by me, and others may differ, but I think that there are some core principles which underpin this practice. The first is neatly summarised with the tagline, "Say what you see," and sometimes filtering out the difference between what you see and what you see for a describer. So think is somebody's angry face may in fact be a series of kind of motions that they make, a grimace, a drawing together of their eyes. It's not always the case that we're actually looking at what we think we're looking at in the first place. And when talking about emotions, that's one of the circumstances in description where that comes kind of clearly into the mix. Having said that, often, particularly in a theatre context, we have very limited time, and it can be a great shortcut to kind of use some widely accepted rules of what constitutes somebody crying. Much easier to say that someone's crying than to say that, you know, rivulets of salt water run down their cheeks, even if that is actually what is presented to you when you look at that. The next golden rule is prepare. Description is rarely ad hoc or ad lib, except in unusual circumstances where you might be describing, for example, a public parade where you would have a scaffold for the description that you're going to offer, but then perhaps a clown in the Christmas pageant suddenly does something unexpected and you have to extemporise, or an actor in a theatre show engages the audience in conversation in a way that's unexpected. In the vast majority of circumstances, a describer has experienced an artwork well before their audience has, probably multiple times. And in the case of theatre, we work from a DVD to kind of laboriously get the timing right. The next is describe objectively. And I think a huge part of that is acknowledging that in the quest to be objective, we have to understand that a describer is also making choices constantly about what they say. So you're acknowledging that it's not really possible to be completely objective, which means every decision you make, you have to kind of assess and question in order to arrive at as close as you possibly can to an objective perspective. Another really important thing, and I just realised that I've included 6 top 5 rules because I couldn't choose between them, but is to work with the other sources of information which are available to you. So if you're describing a contemporary dance piece, it's highly likely that there will be a soundtrack, which is a really of the performance. It's also possible that the dancers' bodies might be making noises as their feet hit the floor or they interact with one another. And these are all resources which are available to a person vision impaired. So the describer's job is not to think, hey, for the next, there's no dialogue, I'll use this to speak over the music and share every little thing that happens, because speaking on top of a soundtrack may be removing a completely other emotional or, you know, important element of a piece of art, which we have to remember also has been made by artists with a particular intent. And our role is not to pull the focus onto us as describers. The next point is to consider the listener, which I think folds in with the one before, which is that a listener does not come to the theatre to hear the audio describer. Well, I would think, and I feel pretty strongly about this, that while there might be people who we have got to know through the process of describing, there's even, you know, people who may have preferences about which audio describers they like to listen to. Nobody comes for us, they've come for the artwork. So considering their perspective, considering what information is accessible to a blind person is really important. And, you know, a classic question that a lot of people have about this is, do we or do we not speak about colour? And do we use terms that relate to sight? And the answer in both instances is that yes, we do. Majority of blind or vision impaired people have had some vision at some point, and therefore generally feel comfortable with just colour. One of the kind of barriers that I give is that while you may use a word like maroon, Oda nil might be straying too far into the kind of specificity, perhaps really only interesting to somebody who experiences it themselves. So there's some grey areas, but we speak about colour, and we refer to site if it's relevant to the description. Point is to use consistent language. So if Will and I were describing something together, we'd ensure that we're not referring to an important visual feature using different languages, for example, in the first half of a theatre show, and then suddenly when we swap in interval, something changes. But there's more broadly than that kind of consistencies of the way that certain things are referred to. So within description, describers work on the basis that if you're talking about a theatre set, for example, during the production you don't refer to it as a set, which is a technical term that has the potential to kind of break people's sense of engagement with an artwork. Yeah. And instead we would speak about it as whatever that set is, if it's a kitchen or a treehouse, yourself into the visual world that you have been given.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that we're trying as much as we can, and it comes back to what we were talking about before with working with other sources of information. We're trying to respect the world that's being created by the artists as much as possible. And part of that is making sure that you understand that somebody is storming out of the kitchen, not exiting the stage. As a particularly glib example from theatre, but yeah, just making sure that where a world is being created, you try and stay within it as much as possible. And the thing with consistency of language is really interesting because there's a few instances where people kind of have a go sometimes, and you'll end up with people who aren't shows that have audio description attached to it. But then people kind of leaping in and wanting to jump on with being part of things like tactile tours, which we run before shows. And just I think it's really important that people understand that there is such a value in the describers being able to maintain that consistency of language when they're working on a show, and to fold in that language into the show, and have that be used by everybody in relation to the description.
But when you talk about people questioning the process, I think what you mean there is people who can see. And, you know, yeah, the experience of listening to description is something that, you know, sighted people often want to try it out, especially if they work for a company that's considering offering description for performances. And common feedback is when I found that really weird. I was kind of overwhelmed by all of the information. Or somebody says, oh, at one point you said something about 2 seconds before it happened. That was weird. It's like, well, it's actually not for you, and it's not actually for us either, because we'll speak about this a bit more later, but the fact that Will and I are both able to see kind of precludes us from having a completely embodied experience of what it is like to require this service rather than to offer it. So we put out a call for people to submit images which we would take it upon ourselves to describe. Quite a few came in and we haven't been able to do all of them, so apologies if yours didn't make it. But we're going to start with a really simple one just to give you kind of an understanding of how pithy we hope the description can be. And I'm going to give you a brief look at the image. Again, this is the clunky desktop view. But there's a picture on the screen, and I'm going to throw over to Will now to offer us a description of that image.
I'm not getting the screen shared, Lara.
Oh, I think I forgot to do that bit. Okay, give me 1 second.
It's okay, I can put it up if you want and keep it on while I'm talking, because I've got my description.
I've got it now. Can you see it now, Will?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So there's an image on the screen, and I'm going to throw back to Will, who's going to describe it.
A still digital image of a beagle puppy. Facing to the left, the puppy is running across a field of grass, chasing a shiny red ball which it has just caught in its teeth. The puppy has white fur with a mask of brown over its dark eyes and big floppy ears. It has large patches, black patches on its back, hindquarters, and tail.
There you go. And description. So that gives you, I guess, an outline of the kind of language. It's always very much about present tense and trying to start by building quite a general picture, which means you cut really quickly to the fact that it's a beagle puppy and it's running over grass, and then you build in the detail that kind of allows someone to paint a more detailed picture of the colour of its fur, where the patches are, you know, and what's going on. And that's based very much on feedback from blind people, that if you don't start with a general outline, someone's own mental picture of what it is that you're describing can be well off track from yours by the time you get to the significant details. So if Will had started by describing a young beagle puppy with patches here, 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 and here, by the time he mentioned that it was outside running across a field and holding a red ball in its mouth, someone could be heading in a completely different direction. For example, imagining that it's curled up on a doggy bed in front of the fire, or, you know, anything else. So there's a kind of broad brushstroke structure, which is followed by plugging in detail. So we thought we'd
always making sure to tell about the medium as well, making sure you're clear that it's not an animated GIF, for example, or making sure that actually what the form of the image and how it is being presented is almost the first thing that you're including, so that people, again, don't go off in that different direction and you've described the whole picture and then you say, oh, and it's animated at the end, and it's like, okay, that's just totally broken the kind of the spell almost of what you're putting together.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that for people who are used to writing or reading about visual art in particular, it's almost the opposite to what I think of as the kind of Sister Wendy approach to art description. Or imagine any of those kind of short documentaries that used to always be on the ABC on a Sunday afternoon before the news, where someone would stand next to a painting. So in the shot, you could see both the person speaking about the artwork and the artwork itself. And so there was this kind of implicit understanding that you were both looking at the same thing and able to see it. And they would speak in a way that really works around the painting, for example, in interesting details. And then it would often conclude with something along the lines of, and there at the centre is the Madonna and Child, you know, sitting on a golden throne with robes of blue. And even though that's the thing that you had all understood from the point of the painting, because of that assumption that you can both see, it's okay to leave that till last. Whereas with audio description, if you did that, it would actually be kind of cheating your listener from an opportunity to be with you on that journey, rather than just having like, surprise, it's the baby ginger. So the way that content is delivered flows against the grain, I think, of visual art description. So, given that we both sort of talk semi-professionally, we're already fairly far into our session, keepers, but we're going to read you out some examples of different bits of description that we've both prepared over the years. So I've got one to start with, which is from a theatre show called The Young King by Slingsby, which was presented in the... It's a really short passage of description which comes late in the performance when it's revealed on the set. Hidden doors open behind the young king, revealing a magical forest stretching out into the distance. He turns and walks towards it, then hesitates and turns back to us. He kisses his head, gives us the royal salute before walking into the forest. So, interestingly, magical is perhaps not a word that I normally use because it's somewhat ambiguous, but fairy tale, or a fairy tale of sorts, and also the effect was magical in that it happened instantaneously, it was completely unexpected, and there was lots of spooky kind of haze drifting through this forest. Another thing that was, you know, I guess a reflection of the deliberations and choices that we make is the term royal salute. Those listening to this, but it had already been described in the production, and in fact this was something we were describing for a group of blind children who'd had a pre-show opportunity to learn a royal salute that was used in show. Will, did you have something from pre-show notes?
Yeah, so as part of the offering that we give for theatre, we will produce pre-show notes that will be available as Word documents, and we'll also record as an MP3. And these give people the opportunity to brief themselves before they come to the theatre, both with information about the show, kind of program information a little bit, the dates and times of performances, some access information about the venue so that people know if there's steps involved, what public transport to get, what other services might be available as part of the performance. And then we'll also include our descriptions of set costume and characters. Those descriptions will also be repeated at the venue in the time between the house opening to let the audience in and the show commencing, so that people can have an opportunity, again, to get that pre-briefing. And the idea is people can tune in and tune out depending on their needs. If they want to listen to it at home, great. If they want to listen to it in the space, then excellent. So I've got a bit of an example from Beauty and the Beast, which was a show a theatre show as part of the Adelaide Festival in 2015. So I might read you some descriptions of the characters from Beauty and the Beast from the pre-show notes. So there are 4 cast members in Beauty and the Beast. Matt Fraser is one of the show's creator, and he plays himself and the Beast. Matt is very slender, in his early 50s, with a handsome face. He has full lips, a strong chin, bushy grey eyebrows, and a pale complexion. He has silver hair cropped close at the back and sides, and his short fringe is styled up and to his left. Matt describes himself as having small but perfectly deformed arms as a result of thalidomide-induced phycomelia. He has a short amount of arm bone from his shoulders, connected directly to his wrists. He has 4 fingers but no thumbs. Julie Atlas-Muse is the other creator. She and Matt are husband and wife. Julie plays Beauty, herself, and one of Beauty's ugly sisters in the production. Julie is a burlesque artist and has the classic looks to match. She has a kind, pretty face with full lips and cheeks. She wears glittery red lipstick, glittery blue eyeshadow, thick black eyeliner, and long false lashes. Her hair falls to her mid-back and is blonde and perfectly styled, falling beside her face and flicking out in perfect curls. She has a slight tan, a curvaceous figure that fills out her figure-hugging gowns. Her look suggests an innocence that is betrayed by her quick wit and shameless sexuality.
Okay, so that was a really interesting show for us to do for many reasons, one of which was that it was quite sexually explicit and the cast had opinions about how directly we should describe content, which was great. It's amazing to work with people who actually consider the role of description. One of the greatest is in Australia, the greatest supporters of audio description are arts and disability companies or practitioners. So it's not unusual to find yourself in a situation describing someone's ability. And I think the technique that Will used there of actually seeking master in his own words rather than making assumptions about how to speak about his arms was an interesting and important one. I've got a little section here which is from some visual art description that we prepared for a Laurie Anderson exhibition, or I prepared for a Laurie Anderson exhibition. And this was when you give a live for the context. Of course, you're not transmitting through a microphone, you have a group of people right there with you, and as many of us would find when we view an exhibition, it's not just the artworks that are of interest but the way they've been displayed. So we try to ensure that we give people a sense of where we're moving to within an exhibition space. So this reads, we've entered the downstairs section of the gallery. It's one rectangular room court. For this exhibition, the walls have been painted black and black carpet has been laid. It's very dark in contrast with the brightly lit foyer. The main source of light comes from an artwork in the centre of the room on the flit strip about 1 metre wide and 6 metres long. It's highly textured and rises higher than the carpet by standing on. In fact, at first, it looks like a highly textured shag pile carpet. As we move closer, the texture looks more like a bed of seaweed. Small strips of an unknown substance are clumped together. It's actually a bed of shredded paper, but not the long strips that come out of the kind of shredder you may have in an office for destroying confidential documents. These strips are not more than 4 millimeters wide and 10 centimeters long. Was in fact an installation made from shredded phone books, and we were able to source a few handfuls of that shredded material so that people could touch it. Those with some vision might have been able to, look up close and explore it, and others could have a tactile reference, because something that is consistently challenging with contemporary visual art is the fact that you're presented with combinations of materials or installations that can't be described because you've never seen anything like them yourself, and therefore you have to try and explain something that you don't have a visual context for. I should mention that as we go, people can submit questions, and there's a group chat facility here via Google Hangout, but also, or where people are watching, but I think Will is going to monitor the tweets for us.
Yeah, tweet me. I'm looking at the hashtag DWF16, or you can send it straight to me at Will McRostie, 2 L's, McRostie, and follow me. Hi.
But look, I guess one of the key points is that imagery doesn't exist in isolation. So we have had an interesting challenge set for us with the images that people have submitted in terms of how we describe them. And we were really interested in one in particular because it shows a very recognizable celebrity from a classic film. And so as soon as you find yourself thinking something like that as a describer, you then have to go recognizable just to me because it's my mum's favorite film and we used to watch it all the time, or recognizable to everyone. You're trying to make, I guess, what's that show where they do we asked 10 people in the street the answer to these questions? Yeah, it's like Family Feud. You're constantly running your own Family Feud competition in your head to determine whether the thing that you think it's reasonable to assume that people might know is in fact reasonable. So I'm going to jump back into screen share and show you guys the next image. Are we in screen share, Will?
Not yet.
Not yet. I'm not very good at this. Here we go.
There you go.
Pass the dog. And we are on to an image which I'm going to offer you a description for. And the first one is a description that makes use of the things that I actually know about this image. So, in fact, let's give it the honour of the full screen version. A film still from the movie Cabaret shows Liza Minnelli in character as Sally Bowles, straddling a chair backwards in front of a shimmering grey curtain. She sits with one leg tucked under her bottom and the other, raised in front of her, rests lightly on the back of the chair. She's captured mid-song as she performs in a nightclub. She's dressed and accessorised exclusively in black, with her cream skin on display. She wears a black halter-neck leotard with jet beading at the neckline, sheer black over-the-knee stockings, and Edwardian-style black suede boots which lace up to mid-calf. She tops the look off with a black bowler hat perched on top of her black hair, which is drawn into stylised sideburns. Her large eyes are accentuated by pointed, caked-on mascara, but don't look towards the camera. Rather, her gaze is focused to our right, and her mouth, painted with red lipstick, is open as she sings. A black beauty spot adorns her left cheek and contrasts with her pale skin. Her creamy complexion is on display elsewhere. Her arms are bare and draped languidly about her legs, while her naked thighs are visible through the slatted wooden back of the chair. So, I know that it's Liza. I know the movie. I feel like Cabaret is iconic. I feel like it's been around for a long time. So that perhaps expands the pool of people who may know it. But really, if I had just been presented this as a photo, what I wouldn't know is that it's from a film. It could be a still image that's intended, only as a single shot. But really the stuff that would change is you'd have an intro. A colour photograph shows a young woman straddling a chair backwards in front of a shimmering grey curtain, and so on and so forth. So here I think the content, or the context and the content, are really significant, but the description would not be fundamentally different. However, being able to add in detail about the fact that it's Liza and it's Cabaret is incredibly useful.
Yeah, it's that metaphor between if you don't know the film and all you talk about is the film and the cultural iconography of it, then that's incredibly othering to people who haven't seen the film yet. On the flip side, if you don't address the cultural context of the image, you are also doing a disservice to people who are obsessed with musical theatre and do love Liza and are a part of this. So part of the private job, sorry, Lara.
Because I think, opportunities that you have to allow people to create shortcuts for themselves are incredibly useful. By mentioning that it's Liza and that it's cabaret, that for some people creates a much kind of fuller picture than just describing it. Interestingly, I opted not to speak about it as the 1930s because I actually don't think, like looking at this, I see more of the 70s than the 30s, although the boots are referencing Edwardian footwear. And I mean, that's certainly an interesting thing when you're describing something that is, I guess, well, aping is maybe too strong, but is emulating another time or culture is, how do you acknowledge that this is what 70s does 30s?
It is, and that's, I think, somewhere where we really differ, Lara, because I am much less versed in style movements and especially costumes, very specific language than I think you might be. So for me, it's always a little more, I have to make a little more effort to go and do that research rather than thinking about, am I going too far?
Sure, and I think every describer has a kind of a focus area, which is the one where they're probably most comfortable, but then maybe also ask themselves the most questions because it's just, I don't know, a rich vein of self-questioning. The other thing I think with that image is whether I should have gone into more detail about what's visible in terms of her crotch. Like her legs are splayed in that position and there's kind of the dark shadow, but I feel like speaking about the fact that she's straddling the chair, sorry, I'm trying to act it out now, straddling the chair, she has one leg up on the back of it, hopefully paints a picture that she's in quite an exposed position, but she's there in a confident way. So that was my attempt at the picture of Liza Minnelli. Thank you to the Liza fan that sent that in.
Iconic stuff.
Yeah.
Shall I do the cat?
Yes, do the cat.
So we had a similar image, which was a still from a film, and neither of us knew what film. It was very obviously a still from a film, but neither of us knew what film it was to start with. So I have done the same thing, but kind of in reverse, where I've prepared a description having just looked at the image, and then I've gone and done a little bit of research and seen what might be added. But it's quite a different example to Liza. So let me bring it up on the screen for you. Screen share, Chrome. Cats on Film. It's from catsonfilm.tumblr.com. Somebody's favorite website on the internet, clearly. So your first version with no context.
Sorry, I just love that whoever submitted it, we can. Oh no, I was about to say we can see all of the tabs they have open, but Will, that's probably your computer, right?
That's my tabs, yeah.
I failed at the technology.
Excise anything that was too embarrassing before the fact, I hope. So a still digital image of a black cat. The cat is sitting, looking up and to the left. White filaments of electricity emanate from the cat's body like a plasma globe, trailing upwards. Its face is frozen in an angry hiss, mouth wide and teeth bared. The cat has a collar around its neck, which is attached to a short chain which trails down out of view. So the kind of slightly interesting inclusion there for me was the plasma globe. But again, I feel like that is such a potent visual and such a good shortcut for somebody if they do have that visual reference. But again, making the balance to make sure you're getting the sense of tendrils of electricity arcing through the air so that somebody who might not have that visual reference also can stay with you in that moment and in that description. Did you have any other?
Look, I would get lightning in there somewhere, I think.
Okay.
which is something, I guess the technique sometimes, if we have a really specialized term, is that you might talk about, something to do with costume. If you described, a particular kind of sleeve, you may use that specific term for someone who has an awareness of it and then describe what it actually is. So plasma globe is not so clear to me. Lightning would be, and I think, kind of speaks about form, but one of the best things about audio description is the nitpicking, and it's like joyous nitpicking with your co-describer of what things mean to you, to them, how they might translate to other people, and this kind of conversation, but like for way, way, way longer, is a really important part of our process. And I have to say, it's often the part that I enjoy the most.
So in terms of trying to research a little bit of where to find this film, what I did was just go back. It was very easy in this case because we had the Tumblr link associated. And let me screen share again, which gives me, thankfully, a little credit. So I don't know if you can read it through my screen share, but The Prestige, 2006, Christopher Nolan, based on the novel by Christopher Priest. So that immediately tells you what film it is from. Is The Prestige an iconic film? And is this an iconic image from that film? Not particularly, would be my argument. There's not a lot of cultural context. There's not a lot of visual information for this film that cultural context will add. So in terms of me adding context, really all it is the second description is a still from the 2006 film The Prestige, featuring a black cat being used as a test subject for electrical experiments by Nikola Tesla. The cat is sitting looking upwards and to the left, white filaments of electricity, same description as before. So deciding in the moment, it's questionable whether I would definitely keep the whole bit about Nikola Tesla in there, which I went away and Googled the scene from the particular film and found it on YouTube. But in isolation, I think that's an example of where adding more information has the potential to confuse, because by mentioning the character of Nikola Tesla may start to imply that Nikola is present in the image without actually adding that much visual information.
Yeah, but then again, if you were describing this, and sorry, I'm in screen share, so what I'm saying won't correspond to what you can see, but if you were describing this to accompany a movie, there'd be a whole lot of information about what's happening that would come from other sources, and you might actually only have a couple of seconds to say, electricity arcs from the black cat, and then someone else would have a line of dialogue which would further add to the story. So if you can see right now, I'm showing the results of a Google search for a painting by Monet, which gives an understanding, I guess, of the pros and cons of using the internet as a research tool. It certainly allows us to kind of specify a whole lot of information, but colour balance can be completely out of whack. And also, I mean, in this instance, Monet painted numerous paintings of the same view of the Houses of Parliament in London, often viewed from a room at the Savoy where he was fond of staying. But this is kind of just a little red flag reminder to myself that there's all kinds of versions of information out there and they're not necessarily accurate. So you need to filter through and make sure you've got good source material. But that brings us to another of the user submitted images, which I have just brought up on the screen and hopefully you can all see. So
you might have to give it another go.
You can't see it?
Nope.
Oh, hang on. I will try again and fail again at this screen share bizzo. Okay, could you see Monet?
No, sorry, I was trying to tell you.
Thanks. So here's Monet and the variety that's available from dear old Google. And then here is one of the images that was submitted for this session. So we decided for this one that Will would attempt a description based on no research, and I would see what the internet had to say about this one. We had a brief conversation yesterday before either of us had done any kind of specific preparation, and, you know, it was interesting to see what our assumptions were. Like, Will noticed the side of the road that the van is on in the distance, and felt that that perhaps set the context of which country we were in. Did you think it was Australian?
I think it's Australian based on the van being on the left, the street signs in the distance being green. I don't recognise the insignia on his arm, but that is the British monarchy's crown, I believe. So we're somewhere in the Commonwealth.
My initial thought was that maybe it was South African, which is based on the most just kind of, I mean, this is exactly the process that shows why we do research, because I don't have any confidence in this. But I was like, oh, he looks a bit like some South African people that I've known. And the girl, well, you've got to start somewhere. And also, not that the girl looks particularly South African, but I was like, she does look a little bit like she could be Indian, and I think there's a large Indian population there, and the side of the road looks dry. And sometimes when I used to play that GeoGuessr game, I would confuse Australian and South African landscapes. So that was my completely ridiculous starting point for trying to work out what this image is. Will, do you want to read us your description?
Yeah, sure. I have to admit, I didn't prepare this one super well, so I might be winging it a little bit. So a still image of an adult man and a young woman standing on a highway. The man wears a uniform. He has green and gold epaulets and a coat of arms insignia on the short sleeve of his blue shirt. He's crouching down to the level of the young woman, who would be about 5 years old. She is wearing a stripy top in blue and white stripes and stripy pants in purple, white, and blue. She holds out her hands with her palms facing up and has a surprised, happy but surprised expression on her face. The man reaches towards her with his left hand and covers her right hand with his. In his other hand, which rests on his knee, he holds a drink carton. In the background, on the side of the road, we can see a small group of people, and that's probably where I would leave it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I was really bothered by his epaulette because I couldn't place it, and insignia are quite easy to research. So I did a little search for crown and 3 lions, and that helped me place it. And then I did a Google image search and got a little bit more information. So here is what I have. In the middle of a country road, free from traffic and fringed with green grass and trees, a strapping, blonde-haired Danish police officer squats down and holds his left hand out towards the right hand of a young Syrian girl. As other older refugees sit by the roadside in the background, the girl, about 7, and dressed in blue and white striped t-shirt and leggings and red sneakers, reaches both hands back towards the police officer in the seemingly universal game of which hand am I hiding something in? Her mouth is open in a wide grin, and a look of triumph lights up her face as she holds her hands palm up, showing the police officer that his first guess, her left hand, was in fact empty. So,
mine was not prepared at all, and that just shows you that's such a good illustration, and I'm happy to look like a bit of a dill for that one, because that just shows you the difference between preparing and not preparing. You've got to prepare, my goodness.
Well, you've got to prepare and you've got to research, and Will was given the difficult task of not researching in that case. So as soon as I looked up the insignia, it was like, oh, Danish, and I totally fell into yeah. But my mental process was, but it can't be Scandinavia because the sun is shining. You know what I mean? Like, oh, it's got to be Australia or South Africa or somewhere really, really sunny. Actually, this is an image that went viral earlier in the year. The girl and her family were traveling from Germany on their way to Sweden, because at that point, Sweden was, you know, one of a kind of dwindling list of countries in Europe that had kept their borders open to Syrian refugees, and the cop had stopped to give them some assistance and had taken off his wedding ring and was playing a game with her of hiding it in hand. And can you guess, you know, which hand behind my back has the ring in it? And she had played, and there's quite a delightful series of photos that show the interaction between the two of them. My description might have gone a little bit far in terms of, you know, talking about the seemingly universal game of which hand am I hiding something in. Incidentally, if someone knows what that game is called, it would be great if you could submit that. But the research does allow the story to become more specific, and also having the information allows the describer to get to the heart of it, I think, is really what it comes down to. So the shoe will now be on the other foot because we have another mystery image. And something else I just wanted to mention, though, where, you know, we've got about 10 minutes to go, is that when we speak about our audience as being people who are blind or vision impaired, that can mean a huge variety of things for different people. So some people may have been completely blind for their entire life. Others may have recently lost some vision. Some may have, you know, peripheral vision or tunnel vision. There's just basically a huge spectrum of what might mean that somebody is legally blind. So sometimes a describer's role is to carry the complete weight for creating visual imagery for somebody, and at other times it's to draw their attention to something. And if you are doing, you know, a kind of a live personalized tour in a museum or gallery, for some people it's simply about facilitating access so they can get really close to something to look at it, or to add other tactile experiences that would help a story come to life. You know, and this next one, I can definitely think of some handling objects or some props that we might use if we were describing this, assuming that it was an artwork in a gallery. So I've done no research, so you will hear base assumptions, and Will has done some preparation. So Will, shall I read first?
Yeah, I'll focus for a second so people get the full screen version of the image. There we go. Okay, yeah, go for it with the unresearched.
Okay, so because I don't have a lot of information, I have to say I've kept it fairly brief. A young black man poses in his small electronics stall. Its walls are barely 2 meters square. Phone chargers, headphones, batteries, and a small poster for a telco hang on display in the background, and the man holds up a battered chipboard display of 33 crudely wired power points, 3 of them with phone chargers plugged in. Now, the question of how to describe people's ethnicity is a really complicated one. Generally, the rule is that if you mention anyone's ethnicity, then you mention everyone's ethnicity. And of course, the broader context might mean that it's more or less important. So I think that this is probably a picture from Africa, but that's completely an assumption. And if this were a still from a movie in which all the characters were black, obviously I wouldn't be saying that every time someone, you know, enters a new screen, just as in a film that's full of white people. And of course, there's many, many more of those in the world than there are, you know, with greater diversity. You don't constantly say, you know, Elizabeth Bennet, a white woman, talks to her sister Jane, another white woman. But it comes up frequently, and it's something people have a lot of questions about. So again, this is an area where the more information you have, the more accurate, and I think therefore the more appropriate and inclusive you can be. So that's my no Google research version, and I'm keen to hear yours, Will.
Sure. A still digital image by Akintunde Akinleye of a Nigerian man holding up a plywood board covered in rows of electrical sockets. The man has dark skin and short cropped hair, and he smiles as he shows off the board. The board is used for a commercial phone charging service and has 33 power sockets covering it in irregular rows. Their inner workings exposed and red and black wires snaking between each. 2 sockets have boxy black power adapters plugged in, their leads trailing off towards the ground. The man stands in a small, roughly constructed booth with whitewashed walls. Phone accessories like headphones and charger cables hang from nails on the wall behind him. A poster for a phone company offers rates of 7 naira per minute, and a string of multicolour beads hangs in the foreground on the left.
See, so much more detail. So how did you find all of that, Will?
So I did the describer's best friend thing, and I slapped that image into a reverse Google search. That led me to a whole number of articles which actually misattributed the the country of origin of the photo, but one of them had a credit for the photographer, Akintunde, and he listed his agency as Reuters. So I went to the photographer's website, couldn't find the photo, so I went to Reuters photo stock, searched phone charger, Africa, and found the listing for the file.
Well done. It was great. And, you know, one of the things I found difficult describing that image is that I thought I knew what the purpose of the plugs were. In fact, I thought they were plugs. It wasn't even completely obvious, but it, you know, it could have been a functional display or a decorative display. So getting into that detail was really great. And I think perhaps one of the things we hoped from this session is that it would provide some understanding of the level of research and detail that is a really important part of audio description. But an interesting point as we kind of move towards the end of the session is the difference between the generally passive way that we absorb visual information and how active it is to listen to something. You know, like there's a lot of stuff here behind me that I can glance at and take in a great deal of detail very quickly, whereas people who listen to audio description, you know, really have to listen to it and process it. And so I think, you know, clarity of understanding, of structure, detail that is relevant, and detail that actually, you know, takes you a big step forward in your understanding of visual content rather than detail that just completely clutters the experience is really significant. And it's what we strive to offer wherever possible, sometimes in very limited gaps between dialogue, as we mentioned, sometimes in circumstances where you can offer, I guess, a richer and more detailed experience. Hey, Will, any questions coming in via Twitter?
No, not really. A few faves on some tweets by Digital Writers Festival, but everyone seems quite content to listen.
Great. If you do want to find out more about audio description, one of the best ways to do it is, I think, to look through any DVDs that you might own and look for a tiny symbol on the back, often so tiny that you really wonder how you know, blind or vision impaired people are expected to find it, but it's the letters A and D in white on a black rectangular background, and that's a symbol that content has audio description available. You find it much as you would the, you know, the, what do you call it? Subtitles for hearing impaired, captions. You can see that I'm biased towards audio description. Turn it on as one of the audio options and listen to it. If you have Netflix, they have an increasing stock of described content. It's really interesting to listen to. And if you have a burning desire to find out more about it, you might want to consider getting in touch with Access to Arts, which is an organisation based in Adelaide. If you're in Melbourne, hit up Will. In a variety of ways, I'm sure that Digital Writers Festival would be happy to pass on contact details, and depending on where else you are in the country, there's other organisations. There's Describers working in Perth, there's some who've done training in Alice Springs, so it's in an interesting collection of places around the country. But yeah, as I said, if you're interested, listen to some. It's usually pretty interesting.
Couldn't put it better.
William?
Sorry, what was that?
Concluding remarks from you?
Concluding remarks. Thank you, everyone who has been listening in. I really hope that this has been a valuable session, and maybe one less person is going to ask me when I'm in a venue wearing a T-shirt that says Audio Describer, how long I've been signing for.
There's a fantastic, I think, like Tumblr of you know, memes, cartoons, and different things about experiences that Auslan or other sign language interpreters around the world have. And often I feel like even though they're speaking about a kind of inversion of what we experience as describers, it's a really similar world of people who are practicing something that assists a small group of people that can be visible to a much larger group of people who often have crazy questions about what's involved. So hopefully this has cleared some of that up. And the other thing I would finish by saying is, if you know someone who's blind or vision impaired, don't assume that they are aware that audio description is available in Australia, because as we mentioned, it's not available on television. So it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I would always offer it to anyone I know who may be able to use the service, just in case they don't know that it's available. They can come along, give it a go, let us know what they think, and most importantly, they can give us feedback as well, which is an essential part of the process that helps us get better. So I think we are all done. Thanks, Digital Writers Festival, for having us. Thanks, Will.
Thanks.
And we'll see you later.